You want to talk about an organization that's got their head on straight. An organization that you could believe in. One that you should believe in. Yes, you can. Your team, your town, your Philadelphia Flyers. My friends, I don't even know what to tell you. The Flyers have been quite the team since returning from the Four Nations break. Okay? They took a potential cup-winning team, a potential cup-contending team, the Edmonton Oilers. They took them behind the old woodshed, and they gave them a little, right? 6-3 win on Saturday against Connor McDavid in Edmonton. And then they hosted a woeful, dreadful, absolutely uninspired Pittsburgh Penguins team. And they curb stomped them on Tuesday night, 6-1 at home. It was a drubbing. And the wildest part of the game, 10 points came from the line featuring Noah Cates, Tyson Forster, and Bobby Brink. Now listen, we got to be real here. That line prior to the Four Nations break was probably the Flyers' best and most productive line. And coming out of Four Nations, they haven't missed a step. Now the Flyers have benefited from getting a few guys back, notably Rasmus Ristolainen, who had an absolute thumper of a goal to get things going last night. But this Flyers team, you guys know where I'm at. Like, losing is good. Losing, get yourself a higher pick. They are going to be a tough out every night. This team, for whatever reason, they very much believe in one another. They very much believe in their ability to get things done. There is a horrible scenario here where some of the other awful teams in the Eastern Conference start to fall farther back, and your team, your town, your Philadelphia Flyers end up drafting around 15, which would make me probably vomit all over myself. But this team has a really rough stretch coming up in March, 7 home games in 11 days. That's going to be a brutal stretch. They're in Pittsburgh tomorrow. They are then in Winnipeg to start the month of March, and then begins the homestand. Home against Calgary, home against Winnipeg, home against Seattle, home against the Devils, home against the Senators, home against the Lightning, home against the Hurricanes. Then it gets even worse. At Tampa Bay, at Washington, at Dallas. They get a little bit of a breather at Chicago. Then they're at Toronto. A little bit of a breather. Home against the Canadiens, home against Buffalo, home against Nashville. Then they're back on the road against the Canadiens. At the Rangers, home against the Islanders, at the Senators, home against the Blue Jackets, at the Sabres to finish up the season. There's a real brutal stretch in there. Now, if somehow this Flyers team ends up winning half of those games, oh boy, it's going to be a very interesting scenario. Now, in fairness, I think that ultimately, and Zach O asks the question, are we still selling LMAO? Yeah, they're still going to sell, and I fully expect to see Scott Laughton dealt. I would be shocked if Scott Laughton is here after the trade deadline. I don't think they're going to sell Risto. I really don't. I said last night on the Press Row Show, I would, if it were me, my gut tells me, and my gut is shrinking a little bit. Russ is losing weight, doing a good job, taking care of himself. My gut right now tells me that if there were a defenseman traded in the next 12 months, I would say it's more likely the Flyers trade Cam York than Rasmus Ristolainen. I firmly believe that the Flyers will be a playoff team next year. Whether that's through a trade, free agency, an offer sheet to an RFA, I think the Flyers are going to add this offseason, and I think they're going to make the playoffs in 2025-26. That's where my head is at right now. I don't think you're going to see this team in the bottom again. So with that in mind, Risto right now has proven himself to be a top 4 defenseman. And there are times that he looks like a top pair defenseman, and he's a big body. This Flyers defensive core has 3 guys in Jamie Drysdale, Cam York, and Emil Andre who are small. Brad Shaw came on Snow the Goalie at the Carnival and essentially said, Stanley Cup winning teams, they don't win with tiny defensive core. So 3 guys who are slight or are small in stature, they're not all going to be here. One of them is going to get dealt. They're not going to deal Andre. No one wants Drysdale. York, to me, is a guy who maybe becomes part of a trade for a 1C. Get yourself prepared for that. If you're a big Cam York believer, You might have to root for him from a distance. That's my hunch right now. Now, I get this from bus campers who says injury risk is too high on Risto to hold on to him. This is the best shot to unload that contract, playing well and healthy. While I agree with you, and I fundamentally do agree that Risto's injury concerns have become a thing, back-to-back years around the deadline, the guy's gotten hurt. I just don't think they're going to trade him. I really don't. Now, if a team blows your socks off, say Toronto calls, right? Toronto apparently interested in Scott Lawton, has had previous interest in Risto. If Toronto comes to you and says, hey, we will give you next year's first-round pick, which is good because you want to get some draft capital for 2026. You already have plenty for 2025. They said, we'll give you a 2026 first-round pick. We'll give you Minton, who we talked about as being maybe a higher upside young forward in the system there with Toronto. And then maybe they give you another conditional pick. Maybe they give you another prospect. They give you a guy who's a change of scenery candidate. Do you consider it if you're the Flyers? I think it all depends on what you think this team is going to be next year. They could look at it rationally and say Jet Lashenko is going to be on the team next year. Takes away the need maybe of a center like a Scott Lawton, although he's played wing a bunch this year. But Lashenko is going to be in the lineup. Lawton out. Okay, that makes sense. Risto, you deal him. Are you going to try to get a defenseman in the draft? Who's going to be a couple years away? Are you going to try to go out and get a defenseman in free agency? Is there a guy that's going to be available in a trade that you think is going to be more reliable, perhaps younger than Risto, that you want to, get things going on? I don't know. I really just don't see them trading him. Now, I could be wrong. It's entirely possible that somebody really... the only way I think they trade Risto is if they get their socks blown off. And that, to me, isn't like one first-round pick. I think Risto at this point, right-handed defenseman, big dude. We always hear about, Risto's built for the playoffs. He's never seen them, but he's built for the playoffs. I don't see them making a move right now. If they do, I don't know. Then we'll have to see what the return is. Like, if they trade Risto, I'm not going to come on the show and cry. I'll say, all right, we'll have to look at what the return is. And if it's a really good return, if it's a 2026 first-round pick plus something else, all right, cool. Fine. We'll see. I'm going to go over here because there are more things over in the comments about Risto and about some of the other things. Chris Reed says, fool's gold is what the Flyers are right now. I think it's fine for them to go. I don't like them beating Pittsburgh in regulation because I call it a 4-point game, right? If you look at the standings right now and if you look at where the draft lottery is, which we're going to do really quick, we're going to take a look at it pretty much every episode from now until the end of the year. We need to have that update about where the Philadelphia Flyers are. So if you look at this, right, Flyers, 59 games played, 59 points. Pittsburgh, by virtue of losing in regulation last night, 60 games played, 55 points, right? So you're at 59 and 55. Now, if that game had gone the other way, Pittsburgh would be sitting at 57. The Flyers would be sitting at 57. You'd be tied. You'd also have a game in hand on Pittsburgh that maybe you lose. This is a mess. Like right in here, let's see. Can I highlight it? No, it's not going to let me highlight from where I want to. Oh, yeah, well, there we go. If you look at this from Seattle through, let's say, Montreal at 11, right? You're looking at a gap of 5 points. 5 points between 8 teams. Now, while I'm psychotic, and there's part of me that says, oh, but look at the difference in the percentage of getting the number 1 overall pick. All right, I understand that it is very unlikely that even from the number 5 spot, you're going to jump up to the number 1 pick. But what I do look at is you don't want to get jumped, right? The draft lottery is for the top 2 spots in the draft. If you finish at number 5, where Pittsburgh is right now, and somehow you get jumped by 2 teams, the lowest you could pick is number 7, right? If you were to somehow fall to 4, the farthest you could end up getting jumped down to is number 6. If you're the Flyers and you end up here, let's say 11, in theory, you could get jumped and you could end up picking at 13. I don't want that. If you're the Flyers, you cannot want that. You should not want that, right? Now, we have had people on Snow the Goalie, including Adam Kimmelman, who's a very respected guy, does a lot of the research around the prospects and around the draft, said it's a 3-player draft. There's a fourth player who's kind of on the cusp, but maybe like slightly down a tier. And then like 5 through, let's say, 18 are all about the same quality player, which on one hand, you say, all right, good. Even if that's true, I would rather give my scouting department the opportunity to say, all right, here's our really strong recommendation, right? And have pretty much their choice of whoever is in that 5 to 18 group picking at number 5. Or if you pick at number 7, they still feel very good about the player. Instead of being like, oh, the Flyers are picking at 13 again, and like whoever was left just kind of fell to them, and let's hope that they got the diamond in the rough. That's where I'm at. Now, you can't tell hockey players to go out and lose. You can't tell Torts to go out and lose. But as I've been saying for a long time here, my friends, lower the ceiling, lower the floor. The only thing that the Flyers can do to maybe affect where they end up in that draft lottery standing is potentially trading a Scott Lawton. Does it lower the ceiling and lower the floor enough for it to matter? I would still argue that yes, it does. If it takes you away from being in that 11-12 mix and it gets you up closer to that 5-6 spot in the draft, yeah, it's worth it. If you traded Risto, you would pretty much guarantee yourself being in that top 5 in the draft. You would essentially guarantee it. I think if they dealt Risto, it would have a Walker-sized cascading effect. I think it would be an absolute disaster for this team. I wouldn't exactly recommend it, and I don't think that ultimately it's a great idea. But if they wanted to do it to try to bottom out this one last time, because again, I think they're going to make the playoffs next year, or they're going to try, that would be the thing to do. Unless Risto gets hurt. Now listen, if Risto were to get injured, not significantly, but like get injured, minor injury, and you're the Flyers, and you say, all right, he shouldn't be playing. Shouldn't be playing. Maybe Risto sits for a few games. Maybe you get a few of your guys. You just, I don't know, Mishkov, he's looking tired again. We're just going to pull him out of the lineup. They're not going to do that. But like in theory, if they did, they'd get themselves in better shape. Now, I don't know.